Rain poured down like bullets, turning the emergency department entrance slick as ice. A paramedic with long brown hair, uniform soaked through, carried her emergency bag running toward the ambulance bay. A nurse waved her off dismissively. Paperwork first, oxygen second. This is a hospital, not the street. She paused for half a beat, then looked up. Oxygen before paperwork. Divide hot-cold, open corridor. 7 minutes later, the entire bay operated like a battlefield command center. The hospital stood speechless. Meet Nora Varga. 31 years old, Austrian-Hungarian heritage, with long brown hair typically tied low at her neck. Her pale skin had an almost luminous quality, and she possessed what people called cold beauty. Sharp, elegant features softened by warm eyes and extraordinary calmness. She wore the standard paramedic uniform in charcoal gray, slip-resistant boots that had lost their shine from countless shifts, and carried herself with quiet precision. On her left wrist, a thin scar ran like a thread across her skin. Her right index finger bore a callus across the first knuckle details that spoke of experiences beyond her official record. St. Northwatch General Hospital sat directly on the coastal highway, where rain bands frequently struck without warning. Water would rush down toward the ambulance bay, creating treacherous whirlpools that turned routine patient transfers into hazardous operations. Nora worked with EMS Unit 47, operating from an aging ambulance that looked unremarkable from the outside, but was meticulously maintained and fully equipped inside, the kind of vehicle that nobody praised but everyone depended on. The dismissal she faced was subtle but constant. Paramedics are great on the street, but slow down when you get to the hospital, staff would say. Where's your paperwork? Where's your missed report? Others would comment on her slight build. She looks too thin to lift patients properly. Nora would smile and make notes in her personal logbook, documenting which ceiling areas leaked during storms, which doors tended to stick, which lights dimmed during power fluctuations. Her daily routine revealed a different story. At 5:10 a.m., she arrived early to check oxygen supplies, monitor batteries, epinephrine stocks, tourniquets, and flashlights, maintenance work that nobody paid her to perform. At 6 a.m., she walked the ambulance bay perimeter, placing anti-slip mats, positioning door wedges, and applying directional tape arrows to mark entrance and exit routes during heavy rain. At 9:40 p.m., she could still be found returning a cervical collar that she had dried and cleaned, color-coding equipment for the next shift. The institutional bias was most apparent during patient handoffs. During a previous call, Nora had brought in a patient with respiratory failure. The receiving nurse demanded paperwork before allowing oxygen administration. Oxygen before paperwork. Please open the pathway, Nora had said calmly. A young doctor had snapped back. Are you trying to teach doctors proper procedure? Nora had stepped back half a pace, opened the oxygen valve with her left hand, and maintained eye contact without changing expression. Instead of arguing with assessments or defending herself, Nora observed and adapted. During each heavy rainstorm, she counted the rhythm of water drainage from roof gutters. When the rhythm slowed, the bay would flood within minutes. She repositioned ambulances strategically, heavier vehicles in elevated corners, lighter ones in lower areas, changes that nobody questioned because they seemed logical. The casual comments continued. A security guard at the rear entrance once joked, "Pretty girl like you shouldn't be out in this weather." Nora had smiled slightly. Rain doesn't care about appearance. Oxygen doesn't care about job titles. Eric, the elderly supply manager with graying hair who supervised emergency inventory, had noticed Nora's attention to detail. He watched her replace batteries in evacuation lighting and remove hair and debris from ECG electrode adhesives with meticulous care. He never asked questions, but sometimes left extra waterproof tape rolls on her equipment cart. The judgment was repetitive and predictable. A night shift nurse once declared, "Paramedics are only good on the street. Inside the hospital, everything changes." Nora had nodded thoughtfully. "Different, yes. That's why we need each other." In Nora's wallet, she always carried a small piece of scorched parachute fabric embroidered with 719. the exact time she had once opened an escape corridor for a trapped unit at Korav Pass. She never spoke about it. She only touched it briefly before each major storm. The call came at 12:07 p.m. as a cascading disaster. Multiple vehicle collision on the coastal bridge, 2 buses had skidded into head-on impact, and a diesel fuel truck had overturned, creating spill hazards across the roadway. St. Northwatch General declared mass casualty incident level 2. The ambulance bay was already pooling with rainwater from the relentless downpour. When Nora pulled her unit into the bay, she turned off the siren and opened the rear doors. Rain hammered the ambulance floor while her first patient, an elderly man with oxygen saturation at 86%, struggled for each breath. The receiving nurse immediately blocked her path. Forms first, beds are occupied. Nora's response was calm but definitive. Oxygen before paperwork, divide hot-cold, open corridor. The charge nurse in the emergency department arrived to intervene. You don't have authority to direct hospital operations. Nora nodded respectfully. I'm directing the bay. I need 2 staff members and 1 security guard. Just give me 7 minutes. What happened next seemed like choreographed chaos, but every movement had purpose and precision that suggested extensive training in crisis management. Nora flipped anti-slip mats into makeshift water collection barriers, diverting rain flow away from the oxygen supply entrance. The technique was improvised, but executed with military-level efficiency. She applied fresh directional arrows on the wet floor, creating a straight corridor from ambulance doors to the trauma bay. Her movements were economical, each action serving multiple purposes. She positioned 2 plastic chairs as intermediate transfer points for patients who could walk independently, reducing bed congestion while maintaining dignity for those who needed assistance. While moving, she called out oxygen before paperwork and placed masks on critical patients, delivering clear, missed reports verbally during transport. Her medical assessments were remarkably accurate for someone working in challenging conditions. She directed security to establish one-way traffic flow using A-frame barriers. Entry right side, exit left side. The guards responded immediately, recognizing competent authority when they heard it. She distributed absorbent towels along slip-prone areas at the entrance steps, preventing a cascade of falls that could have created additional casualties. A small crisis emerged when family members rushed in with cell phones recording, nearly colliding with a stretcher in motion. Nora intercepted them with gentle but firm authority. Cameras to that corner. Oxygen happens here. Her voice wasn't loud, but something about the combination of rain-soaked urgency and clear logic made everyone step aside without argument. She turned the storm into a tactical advantage. Using a tarp from her ambulance, she created a wind barrier for the cold zone, where patients who could wait were sheltered. The improvised structure was both functional and considerate. She stacked empty supply boxes into temporary steps so stretchers wouldn't slip on wet surfaces. Each modification addressed real hazards that others hadn't even noticed yet. She applied tape to her gloves marked "Breath Over Fear," a reminder for herself and her team that seemed oddly specific and practiced. The final confrontation came when the same nurse who had demanded paperwork earlier complained loudly, "Oxygen first, paperwork later. Who's responsible for that?" Nora looked directly at her. "Are you responsible for patients or for forms?" Silence. Then a slow nod of understanding as the nurse recognized the fundamental priority that had been temporarily forgotten. 3 critical cases proceeded simultaneously, demonstrating Nora's ability to coordinate complex medical operations. Patient 1 reached the trauma bay with oxygen saturation improved to 93%. The respiratory support had been precisely calibrated during transport. Patient 2, suffering a femur fracture with moderate blood loss, received a tourniquet applied at the correct pressure point, with time marked on the band using waterproof ink. The technique was textbook perfect. Patient 3, experiencing bronchial constriction, received nebulizer treatment that Nora prepared and handed off appropriately to nursing staff. Her medication knowledge was surprisingly extensive. A dangerous moment developed when diesel fumes drifted into the bay and someone attempted to light a cigarette to calm their nerves. Nora grasped the person's wrist, applying pressure at a specific anatomical point, enough discomfort to make them release the lighter without causing injury. The technique was precise and professional. "No flames near oxygen," she said clearly enough for 3 nearby areas to hear. Suddenly, a power fluctuation caused lighting to flicker and suction equipment to pause for several seconds. Nora switched to flashlight illumination and called low light, the same command she had used in cafes and kitchens. And somehow everyone became calmer, responding to her tone rather than panicking about the equipment failure. The bay functioned like a coordinated operation. Entry and exit routes remained clear: hot zone near trauma rooms, cold zone under rain protection, oxygen stations positioned immediately inside doors. Doctors emerged to receive patients smoothly, without bottlenecks or confusion. The handoffs were seamless, suggesting that Nora had anticipated their needs. A department supervisor whispered to a colleague, "Who organized this setup?" The transformation was complete. What had been chaos 7 minutes earlier now operated with military precision. Every person knew their role. Every pathway served its purpose. Every critical patient received immediate attention while stable cases waited comfortably. But the most remarkable aspect wasn't the efficiency, it was how natural it felt. Nobody was shouting orders or creating drama. The system simply worked because someone had created structure where none had existed. Dr. Miller, an emergency physician who had previously served as a military medic, observed Nora's technique and noticed details that others missed. The precise placement of tourniquets, the way she assessed respiratory distress without equipment, the automatic prioritization of airway management. When he noticed the specific callus pattern on her index finger and the thin scar on her wrist, recognition began to dawn. On Nora's left wrist was a thin red cord tied with 3 precise knots. When an older nurse asked about it, she simply said, 3 times without lights, 3 people still alive. Then she pulled her sleeve down to cover it. After 7 minutes, the rain continued, but the crisis had stabilized. Patient 1 was breathing steadily. Patient 2 had been transferred to surgery, and patient 3's wheezing had subsided significantly. The ambulance bay experienced a rare moment of calm amid the storm. Dr. Lawson, the emergency department chief, stepped outside, still processing what he had witnessed. His 20 years of emergency medicine had never included anything quite like the coordination he had just observed. "Who established the corridor system and zone divisions?" he asked directly. A nurse pointed toward Nora. "She did. The paramedic." Dr. Lawson studied her with new interest, noting details he had missed during the crisis. "What's your name and where did you learn to use weather conditions for tactical organization?" Nora's response was characteristically brief. "Places without Wi-Fi, where rain is neutral, you just give it the right job to do." Dr. Miller, the former military medic, approached with growing suspicion. He had been observing the callus pattern on her index finger and the thin scar on her wrist marks that told a story of prolonged weapons handling and high-stress operations. "Have you ever maintained heavy equipment for more than 200 hours continuously?" he asked pointedly. Nora paused for half a second. "I've maintained things heavier than equipment decisions." The response carried weight that made Dr. Miller step closer. He had heard similar language from special operations personnel who had carried responsibilities that went far beyond standard military service. Eric, the elderly supply manager, had been watching the entire operation with knowing eyes. He approached his storage cabinet and placed a steel-wrapped pen engraved with K11 Delta on a nearby stainless steel table. Dr. Lawson touched the item and looked up questioningly. "Someone left this behind once," Eric explained quietly. "Today I saw someone who knows how to use it." The significance wasn't lost on Dr. Miller, who recognized the marking system used by classified units. His own military experience had brought him into contact with special operations personnel, and he understood the implications of that particular designation. 20 minutes later, a vehicle arrived at the hospital entrance. Lieutenant Commander Marcus emerged wearing a rain-soaked jacket, his expression serious and purposeful. Dr. Lawson had made a phone call. "We just witnessed someone coordinate emergency response with exceptional skill under impossible conditions. You might want to know about this." The pause on the other end had been telling. "Name, Nora Varga." Marcus's response was immediate. "I'm on my way." When Marcus entered the ambulance bay and saw the red cord with 3 knots on Nora's wrist, his entire approach changed. He had worked with enough classified personnel to recognize the significance of that particular identifier. "Ghost-11, he said quietly. "At Korav Pass, 719, when radio communications failed, you opened the corridor for 8 people to escape. Today, you opened a corridor for an entire hospital." The bay fell completely silent. Hospital staff who had been moving equipment paused in their work. The nurse who had insisted on paperwork before oxygen lowered her head. I apologize." But Nora didn't embrace the recognition or use it to justify her earlier actions. Patients are still in treatment rooms. Medical review before applause. Dr. Lawson nodded, his attitude shifting from defensive to educational. He was beginning to understand that he had witnessed something far more significant than good crisis management. An impromptu debrief session began right there in the rain. Nora drew diagrams on wet tarp using waterproof markers, her movements precise and practiced. Oxygen paper, establish airway before documentation. Hot-cold, separate immediate intervention from cases that can wait. Corridor, entry and exit paths that don't intersect. Rain is an opponent when you fear it, an ally when you assign it a role, she explained. Her teaching style was direct and practical, focused on principles that could be applied immediately. Dr. Miller asked about her medical assessment techniques. "You identified multiple conditions without standard diagnostic equipment. Breathing patterns, skin color, pupil response," Nora replied. 3 indicators that work regardless of available technology. Trust what you can observe directly. The most challenging question came from Dr. Lawson. "Would you consider joining our hospital's disaster response leadership program?" "No names, no photographs," Nora replied. "Just outdoor simulations during storm conditions." A phone call from hospital administration interrupted the discussion. The medical director's voice was urgent. "Who organized the bay operations?" "A paramedic named Nora Varga," Dr. Lawson answered. "I want her to debrief with executive leadership as soon as the weather clears." But perhaps the most human moment came when Nora noticed family members of patient 2 struggling with wet paperwork outside. She provided them with her rain jacket and guided their hands as they signed surgical consent forms. "Now it's time for paperwork," she said gently. "Oxygen is handled." The revelation recontextualized everything the hospital staff had observed. Nora's calm authority during crisis, her immediate recognition of life-threatening symptoms, her ability to organize complex logistics without creating conflict. It all made sense now. She wasn't a street paramedic who had gotten lucky during an emergency. She was an experienced operative who had chosen to apply special operations skills in civilian medical service. The red cord with 3 knots represented 3 occasions when she had maintained operations without electrical power, and 3 people who had survived because of her ability to function in impossible conditions. The embroidered fabric marked 719 commemorated the exact time she had opened an escape corridor at Korav Pass, allowing her unit to extract successfully under hostile fire. Her presence at St. Northwatch General wasn't coincidental. She had deliberately chosen emergency medical service as a way to continue protecting people who needed immediate assistance. The early morning equipment checks, the strategic positioning of safety equipment, the emergency protocols she had quietly established, all of it demonstrated ongoing commitment to saving lives. But perhaps most significantly, her response during the mass casualty incident had elevated everyone's performance. Hospital staff had functioned more effectively because she had created clear structure and eliminated dangerous confusion. She had demonstrated that leadership in medical emergencies required calm assessment rather than loud authority, and that effective coordination could happen regardless of official hierarchy. The three-command framework, oxygen before paperwork, divide hot, cold, open corridor, represented principles that could be applied in countless emergency medical situations. More than technical knowledge, she had shown that competence and service could exist anywhere, often in the most unexpected roles. Dr. Lawson approached as the debrief concluded. The phrase oxygen before paperwork was painful to hear, but absolutely correct. Thank you. Nora nodded. I learned it during storms like this one. Type, I owe a debt. If someone has ever kept your breathing stable before paperwork could reach the desk. After the storm passed, real changes appeared throughout St. Northwatch General Hospital. A small sign was installed in the ambulance bay. Oxygen paper hot cold corridor with directional arrows. The anti-slip mats were permanently modified with hinges to function as water collection barriers, just as Nora had improvised. Low-light switches were installed along the drainage system to reduce panic responses during power fluctuations. Nora began conducting outdoor simulation training for nursing staff, security guards, and patient transport personnel, the people who rarely received advanced emergency training. She didn't teach medication protocols or complex medical procedures. She taught pathways and priorities. Anyone can maintain corridors, push a stretcher, clear a slip hazard, hold a door open, she explained during sessions. On the whiteboard in the morning briefing room, someone had written in uneven handwriting, oxygen before paperwork, divide hot cold, open corridor. Below that, breath over fear. The impact spread throughout different hospital departments. Pediatrics adopted the corridor concept for separate pathways during seizure emergencies. Obstetrics created low-light poster protocols for pregnancy loss counseling, reducing sympathetic nervous system activation while increasing respect and dignity. Security staff implemented the directional hand signal system, entry right, exit left. The most meaningful personal moment came when the nurse who had originally insisted on paperwork before oxygen brought Nora a cup of hot tea. I apologize for prioritizing forms over airways, she said quietly. Nora accepted the cup gratefully. On rainy days, everyone gets wet. Let's just dry the anger first. Small markers of Nora's influence appeared throughout the hospital. Carved discreetly under the bay door handle were the words, 719, open corridor. Inside the oxygen supply cabinet, a small piece of colored tape bore handwritten words, if panicking, follow arrows. The changes weren't just procedural, they were cultural. Staff members began recognizing that emergency competence could come from unexpected sources. The quiet paramedic who seemed unremarkable might possess skills that could save multiple lives during critical moments. More importantly, the three-command framework became part of informal hospital culture, passed from experienced staff to new employees. Establish airways before documentation, separate critical cases from stable ones, maintain clear pathways for movement. Dr. Lawson made an unannounced visit to observe one of Nora's training sessions. He watched how she supported each individual participant, offering specific guidance tailored to their particular responsibilities and challenges. Before leaving, he added one line to the whiteboard. Today, I learned emergency medicine from a paramedic. That's the best thing that can happen to a doctor. The session participants laughed with genuine appreciation rather than embarrassment. The most significant long-term impact was how the experience changed staff attitudes toward interprofessional collaboration. They learned to identify and value competence regardless of official job titles or departmental hierarchies. Future emergency situations at St. Northwatch were handled with notably improved coordination. Staff members applied Nora's principles automatically: airway stabilization before bureaucratic requirements, logical triage separation, and clear traffic flow management. Years later, hospital personnel would remember not just the technical skills they had learned, but the lesson that expertise could exist anywhere, and that the most important contributions often came from people who didn't seek recognition for their knowledge. Type, I will live with dignity. If you believe skills and calm can transform a rainy day into a learning day for an entire hospital, titles fall before the storm. When clouds tear open the sky, hospital or street makes no difference. Only airways and pathways matter. Paramedic or doctor are roles. Oxygen before paperwork is the reason. Nora applied arrows, positioned wedges, changed batteries, work nobody applauded. Then in 7 minutes, invisible preparation became visible difference. Rain isn't the enemy, rain is force. We choose to use it or endure it. Corridors through rain are metaphors. Amid chaos, open one straight path. For anyone standing at any entrance, you might be a nurse, paramedic, porter, security guard, or volunteer. Choose 3 commands for where you stand. Apply 1 arrow, open 1 corridor. When someone says paperwork first, respond gently but clearly, oxygen first. Nora's story teaches us that competence exists everywhere, often in the most unexpected roles. The person arriving soaked from the storm might have skills that could organize an entire emergency response. We live in institutions that prioritize process over outcomes, documentation over intervention. But real expertise often chooses positions based on where lives can be saved, not where recognition can be earned. How many times have you dismissed someone because of their current assignment? How often have you assumed that protocol matters more than immediate human need? Nora could have leveraged her Ghost-11 background for prestigious positions and administrative authority. Instead, she chose to serve people who needed immediate assistance, applying special operations principles to civilian emergency medicine. Her approach demonstrates that influence doesn't require official authority. Leadership in crisis situations comes from competence and clarity, not from hierarchy or loud commands. The 3-command framework she established, oxygen before paperwork, divide hot-cold, open corridor, represents principles that apply far beyond medical emergencies. They're about prioritizing human need over bureaucratic procedure, creating logical organization during chaos, and maintaining clear paths forward. Most importantly, Nora's story shows us that service takes many forms. Skills developed in special operations can serve people through teaching, through preventing small problems from becoming fatal ones, through ensuring that life-saving resources reach those who need them most. When you encounter someone being dismissed or overlooked because they don't fit institutional expectations, remember that competence doesn't always announce itself. When you're in positions to evaluate others, look for evidence of practical capability alongside official credentials. When you find yourself with knowledge that could help others, remember that the most important teaching often happens during real emergencies between people ready to learn and people willing to act without seeking credit. Nora's story reminds us that excellence doesn't need announcements. Like her 3 precise commands during the storm, quiet, effective, but absolutely decisive when breathing depended on it.
If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to The Veteran's Story. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.